All right, welcome back to the AI debate this afternoon. So for the first session in this afternoon, we are having two teams, one from Value 3, the other one is Crystal AI. So I'll start letting them to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Mishra from Value 3. I'm here with you, and looking forward to the debate.
Hi, I'm Thomas Meichl. I'm from Crystal AI. I'm heading the advisory team at Crystal, looking at our client portfolios, and I'm excited to be here for this debate. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Swapnil Mishra from Crystal.ai. I manage the private wealth business in Crystal, and yeah, very excited to debate.
Yeah, we have one more representatives from Value 3 Darling from overseas. We will let him to do his introduction.
Founder and CEO of Value 3. We are an AI platform in capital markets working with financial institutions for better decision making.
All right. So at the beginning of the debate session, the two teams actually don't know which side they're going to debate for, so we're going to have a scissors, paper, stone session to decide. So we'll have two gentlemen here to do, yeah, let's go for the...
Good luck.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So the winner for this session, for the scissors, paper, stone is Value 3. So you guys cannot decide. So by the way, our topic today is, will AI and data-driven financial services enlarge the wealth gap in our society? So if you pick yes, meaning you think AI and data-driven financial services will enlarge the gap, the wealth gap.
We'll take the negative that it won't.
So you will pick the negative. Well, the Crystal AI will go for yes, you think AI and data-driven financial services will enlarge the wealth gap in our society. Well, although you are in a disadvantaged position, but you can choose which team will start first.
Well, I let the proponent start first.
Yeah. All right. So I think we have someone. We have we'll let the, what's his name again? Avanav. Yeah, Avanav. Hi. Well, let's listen to Avanav's statements. So Avanav, I hope you listen clearly. You are now speaking for AI will not enlarge the wealth gap in our society. You will have.
So I think AI has improved significantly over the last years. I think there was a point when a lot of talk was that AI is only available to the wealthy. But due to the advances in the recent years, I believe the cost of hardware and compute has come significantly down. And which is why we are seeing in the recent years a lot of technology and companies and products that are bringing this technology and making it available to the wider mass. So I would have said that maybe a decade ago, AI was more available to the wealthy and rich. However, due to the advances and the significantly reduction in cost of operations, the AI today has we have been able to build it in a way that it is available to the masses. So to that extent, we believe that going forwards, it would not be the reason to enlarge the wealth gap. If we go back a little bit in the history, we have seen this through different industrial revolutions. We have had the same concern during the industrial revolution in textiles or manufacturing jobs, where a lot of automation took place in the past, which obviously replaced a lot of jobs, but also created a lot of jobs. And I believe to ensure that the wealth gap issue remains solved, what is more important is reskilling of the talent. And there we all need to work together. Financial education is important. And that plays a major role, that these new jobs that are created by AI are filled by the workforce at hand. So in that sense, the AI is actually going to be an enabler going forwards. Like we at Value 3 is also creating technology so that the smaller SMEs, MSMEs are able to now get access to the credit markets and remove the information asymmetry. The wealth management platforms that were earlier available only to the wealthy and ultra high net worth individuals are now available to the wider masses. The financial education is being grown into the wider masses through AI as well. So I do strongly support that this would actually be a facilitator, if anything, in the futures of financial markets. Thanks.
All right. All right, sorry about the bit technical issue. We're coming back to the live here. Now we just heard from Value 3 on their. Oh, am I back? Am I back? Yes. Okay, we're back. Yeah. Okay, great. So we just heard from Value 3 on their statement. They believe that AI will not enlarge the wealth gap in our society. So come back to the live here, and I want to hear from Crystal AI on your points. Who will go first?
Sure. Yeah, if I may start, I'm a financial markets person. So as I said earlier in the introduction, I'm running advisory. I deal with financial markets on a daily basis and investing. And the conclusion is that AI and enabling that and basically using data science is actually increasing the wealth gap, because this is a tendency that we have seen in the data that the rich are getting richer. Yeah, it is not something where AI has helped to close that inequality gap. So what we're looking at is the pyramids as to how is the wealth distributed. While you might have some nuances and some variations over time, but as a matter of fact, the top 1% in this year in the United States alone have increased their wealth by more than 1.8 trillion. And that is something that has raised the inequality gap. And these investors and these individuals, they have been enabled through AI, and they have been enabled through data science and all tools that they have, which are not available to the average person on the street. And also, I would say, in a sense, you can compare this. They have been turbocharged in the in widening the wealth gap, and it's also a pure numbers game. Yeah, it's a pure numbers game. If you have 10 million and you're investing it, and there's another person in the street that has only 10,000, both make a 10% return. The 10 million person has 1 million more. The 10,000 person has 1,000 more. So the gap has increased. So from an absolute perspective, it is definitely increasing the wealth gap. So that's my opening statement.
All right. So yeah, next turn. You want to get Value 3, do you have something else to tackle on that? Or?
Yeah, I'd like to address a couple of points Thomas has made here. He's correct, by the way, that the wealth gap has increased in the United States in the last couple of decades. However, that's a very myopic view on the situation, because over the last 100 years, it has not increased. It's actually gone down and back up if you look at the curve, if you look at the data. So that's incorrect. The second thing is he provided no evidence at all that this is caused by AI. Or in fact, the data industry. So yes, the wealth gap has increased, but there's no link, there's no correlation between that and AI and data. So it's wrong to blame that. It's a very long boat to draw. Back to general technology trends. Every year in the software industry, there are 10% of jobs lost just through innovation and technologies going out of date. So people need to learn to reskill, and that's where governments come in. So the Singapore government's very good at reskilling workforce mid-career, educating their workforce, and that's what needs to happen to ameliorate any potential adverse effects of AI or data finance. Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. You still have 2 more minutes. You could speak more because everyone has like around 3 minutes.
All right. So obviously there's another aspect to wealth gap. So as Thomas mentioned, the gap between the top and the bottom may increase, but if the bottom's increasing, and say, for instance, in India or Asian countries where, 100 years ago, they didn't have sanitation, didn't have education, didn't have healthcare. If you bring it up to a Singapore level, there's quite a disparity in Singapore between top and bottom. But still, if the bottom level is to a sufficient point, then really it doesn't affect your quality of life anyway. And another side effect, another angle to this is other technologies are also, as I mentioned earlier, having an impact. One of them is electricity generation. So a lot of our technologies, especially computing, rely on electricity, and the cost of electricity is a big cost for Amazon and obviously AI services, and that will become zero. So that'll be the cost of water soon, because we're producing fusion reactors and a lot of renewables as well. So really the cost of energy over the next few decades will drop to the cost of water. And so that will mean that this is, as I've mentioned, more widely available and will ameliorate, again, any adverse effects of this wealth gap. Thanks.
Okay, great. So the last part of the starting discussion, the debate session 2 is we're going to have Crystal AI to last speaker to make your points.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. There are a lot of interesting points. I would say the most, the one dimension to this problem is we are assuming and we are looking at technology as if AI and technology is working in isolation and solving problems. There are people sitting behind AI and technology. So the reason problems happen or reason the gap is widening is not because technology is doing something which is contributing to the gap directly. It's the people who control that technology. So there are human beings sitting behind that, and the human beings are becoming extremely powerful because these tools, while providing cheap electricity, are also empowering the wealth owners, because the technology owners are becoming wealth owners. So if you see in the breakup of billionaires, the tech billionaires is becoming higher and higher, and hence it's becoming a source of getting that power. So first is the human beings who control the technology, and hence are there. The second part is the biases that come from that. So technology itself can become biased because there are human beings who are managing that technology. And the biases here, if a human being is biased, the effectiveness of that biasness is limited to interactions that you may have with 5 people or 10 people. But when a technology platform becomes biased, then you can imagine the scale at which it is going to apply that bias. And we are seeing, early stages where things are being, measured in terms of response to a Google search. We are seeing the influence on political outcomes. So we are seeing that. So these two things, I would say, 2 points, which is the biases that come and the fact that people control, are directly going to contribute to concentration of wealth and more power. And it cannot be swept away by saying that the entire spectrum is shifting up. So that's the opening statement.
now our debaters have already started making the, initial statements on their views on the topic. We're taking a few minutes to actually get the audience to look at the QR code. So you can scan the QR code, joining the session and voting for your favorite team. We'll just pause here for a few seconds. Oh, that's in the QR code. All right, so you can hold your cards during the free debates. Yeah. All right, let's come back. So we move to the next session, which is the free debates, where people here in live can freely debate. So we'll start from value 3 because you start. Well, later for the conclusion part, you will conclude last. So let's go for the 10-minute free debate.
Okay, so you just asked question. Okay, so Thomas, you alluded to the fact that AI and data-driven services would be the cause of this wealth gap increasing. I'm not debating whether it will increase or not, but I'd like to see some evidence that you believe it's AI that will cause this, as opposed to other technologies or factors.
Okay. So let me lay out the points again. I think we have made a couple of points why this is happening. But in summary, as I said, from the point that Swapnil made is in terms of AI creating certain biases. And the question that we should all ask ourselves is, who is controlling the technology? Who owns the data that is produced? And what is done with the data? Who controls as to what is happening with the data? And that is something that I think is a big driver, because you can ultimately control in which direction your investments are going, for example, for people who have access to the data, right? And this is not something that everybody has the same access to. Yes, I do agree that these days, I mean, we are living in fantastic times. You have the whole entire knowledge of the world and the human history at the press of your button on your phone, and this has all been enabled for technology. But I believe that with AI, we have moved to a next level, how this technology is applied, and there is no democratization as to who has access to that. So while I hear your point and your argument about the greater good of it, we have not really seen any evidence that this greater good has been happening, and that's why I would very much like to hear your evidence and your substantiation of that it's really better and that the average person has been benefiting from that data.
Yes, I think we'll clear up one point, and that is that we're not saying that necessarily AI will improve the wealth gap. As I said, over the last 100 years, the wealth gap has remained pretty much flatline. And so at least in the United States, and we would see that continue. We don't think that AI will adversely impact that. And to your point around access to the data, I think services now, with your cloud services, there's a lot of AI cloud services that are open to everyone. And to get started, it actually costs nothing. So a lot of these services, as Microsoft Azure or AWS, they provide a free year's access to anyone on the planet to use these AI services. So I don't see that cost. Obviously, there's access to internet, but again, technology is moving forward. A lot of countries now do have access to the internet, even through public computers. So I see, again, the cost of actual hardware has dropped for access. So for instance, we see that Apple last month, I believe, was it the month before, Apple released their new M1 chip, which has destroyed Intel's market. So it's now faster than every Intel chip on the planet that's dominated the market for 40 years. There's been a massive change there in the acceleration of and the decrease in cost. And that's not just the cost of computing. Amazon and Microsoft are now using these chips in their cloud compute. So it's the cost of electricity. Electricity consumption will drop. So it'll become even cheaper at an accelerated rate over the next few years and decades. So,
sorry, let me get back to that point that you're making, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because this is exactly how is it then applied. If we're talking about developments for cloud, developments for quantum computing, there is a huge application in the investment world. And how is it? What is the consequence of that? The consequence is for people who can invest, you're creating more wealth versus those who need to struggle and fight for on a daily basis, not to be displaced by AI.
If you take the
So
example
if I can make a point,
by making that chip, it's the Apple's. Where is the value of that demonstrated? In the Apple stock. Who's the owner of the Apple stock? So the capital market today, the biggest controller, or rather, if you see from a historical point of view, capital is the power. So capital markets hence control and influence the wealth gap. So you're absolutely correct that wealth gap has remained wide, and that's because the capital is distributed in unequal terms. Today, that capital growth is getting accelerated because of access to even smarter tools, which do help some people, but predominantly help the owner of that capital, which in this case is not money, it's also technology.
Yeah, just on that point about Apple, actually they don't own the chip architecture. It was actually an ARM chip, so it's the most of the architecture is basically open. So it's owned by Acorn Research, which is ARM, and they're in every device. So Samsung devices, as I say, Amazon are now using them in cloud. So I don't see it as being concentrated in specific areas. And to the point about wealth, as I said, there's always been an advantage for wealthy people to have access to the intelligence, whether it's human intelligence or artificial intelligence, to provide advantages and keeping their wealth. So I don't see it as a game changer in that respect.
Let's turn this around. Can we frame it in a manner that what is technology doing? So the gap is already there. We've agreed on that the gap is there. We are now saying that is AI increasing the gap? Is AI doing anything to prevent proportionate application of
so I think
benefits? Is there anything that AI is doing to prevent?
The debate topic is that it is increasing it. So our argument is it's not, it's maintaining it. So we don't need to defend that point. But to that end, I believe it is. I believe that we are democratizing the services. As I said, previously you couldn't get this. Cloud didn't exist until 15 years ago, or at least public cloud didn't exist until 15 years ago. And so that has opened up people anywhere who have the skill. As Elon Musk says, if you read the books, you can learn this. And I'm a big believer in that. The Singapore government is a big believer in education, and that you can offshore and outsource all of the low-skilled jobs and just give your citizens the higher skilled employment. So I'm a big believer in that, and that is the way of the future.
Yeah, we should go. Yeah. So you're taking all it by yourself.
Hi, thanks for bringing me in. So I would just like to make a point. So I think in this debate we are taking a very narrow view of the contributions of AI. So I think AI is in fact facilitating both access to wealth as well as services to a much wider population than it was ever available. So look at the applications in the area of image detection, in the area of self-driving cars, in the area of access to healthcare through medical imaging analysis. So all the healthcare that was extremely expensive, whether it is MRI scans, retina scans, cardiology, cancer cells, there's a lot of applications in those areas. The AI today is able to generate music of a particular style. It is able to produce text of a particular context. It is able to do customer support. And also provide access to the wealth management solutions and the financial access to people and the solutions to the people, which was earlier not available because these services were too expensive for financial institutions to serve the underserved. So this entire underserved market is actually getting wider access to financing solutions and thereby creating wealth, building financial inclusion, and at the same time providing them access to a whole new variety of solutions. So AI is essentially, and so the other point that the team from Crystal AI made was about the bias. So this has been empirically evidenced that AI essentially learns the same way the humans do. That is through trial and errors. If you give enough inputs to it with the expected output, it is able to derive the outcomes. And it basically learns through statistical analysis and optimizes that over time. And this is pretty much how human brain works as well. However, there has been now enough empirical evidence through studies in across Oxford, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon and other institutions that the prediction rate of AI is actually much better than human prediction rate. So in that, and it is more stable and less biased than human cognitive bias and recency bias that human analysts or decision makers would have. So to that context, actually, bias is not the problem as much with the AI if applied properly. Of course, it can be forced fed into the model, but that's another topic. As far as the commentary about Facebook's recent challenges and the political bias is concerned, so that was less to do with AI. It was more to do with controlling the platform in terms of because it's a public platform. So it's more about how they control access to information versus the application of AI per se. So if you look at even in history, so throughout the 19th century and 20th century, this was the same topic during the textile technologies, when they came through, or during the manufacturing. And there is evidence that those workers, when reskilled, actually increased their economic wherewithal, and they produced more. In US alone, agriculture used to be one of the largest workforce, right? 40% of the US workforce was in agriculture. And today there's about 2 to 5% in agriculture only. But that 2 to 5% in agriculture now produces for the entire US and exports on top of it. So the wealth over there has obviously increased. Now, no doubts, when AI creates wealth for the underserved, it will also create wealth for the already rich. So, and which is why the wealth gap is probably going to stay unless there is a significant amount of work that needs to be done through the governments, in the area of reskilling labor, which is difficult and challenging given the amount of labor reskilling that is required. And which is why some of this gap would remain. And I think this is where in Singapore, Monetary Authority of Singapore has been quite cognizant about the fact, and a lot of subsidy that has come in through and the grants that have come in through with regards to COVID, as well as in technology grants, have been in the area of reskilling existing labor. And I think they foresee these challenges, and that's why the focus on reskilling. So AI on its own has been more fulfilling and rewarding, both in terms of wealth and services to the wider masses, and especially the underserved community. However, and created wealth for them, and is creating wealth for them, giving them access to both healthcare and financial solutions that they probably never had, and bringing in financial inclusion and healthcare inclusion. However, as far as wealth gap is concerned, that probably would stay, because obviously, as it will serve the underserved, it will also serve the wealthy and rich. Those would be my comments. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. We're back. So there have been a lot of things said with relatively little substantial evidence. Again, I find. So there's one point, however, that I would like to really go into is there was mention about the textile revolution and a comparison to that. Now, let's go back in history and see to what it has led. And the same to your point earlier on, Richard, you're comparing to 100 years ago. Now, 100 years ago, yes, it has not changed 100 years ago, but that was in the 1920s. And if you think back, the wealth gap was the same, but you're missing out what happened in between, right? We had a World War in between. There was this, that societies always reach a tipping point when you are getting at this extreme dislocation between the top 1% versus the broad masses. Because no matter what you're bringing up in terms of how nice it is that you have 50,000 people more who are not under the poverty line, but people are always aspiring higher. And it ends ultimately to more and more tension in the entire system. And we have seen this through history over and over again. It was the British Empire. The fall of the British Empire was because of the unequal distribution. It goes through through human history over and over again. And I feel that at the moment we have to be careful that we are not making the same mistake and that we are not repeating history again. And therefore, I'm a big proponent of AI and data enabling, but my point here is that at the moment how it is done, it is increasing the wealth gap. And that puts us on a very dangerous path. And I do feel very strongly that there needs to be very strict, I would not say control because that sounds too socialist, but there needs to be some sort of like consensus as to who controls the data, what is done with the data, and how can we deploy it. And that goes back to the point that Swapnil made. How is it deployed in a way that it benefits more people? And you have brought up the subject of Singapore, and I cannot argue with any of that because I think Singapore in particular is an outstanding example. But the problem is we are not only discussing about how AI and data-driven financial services in Singapore change the society. It is a global problem, and that is the point where I feel that there is too much isolation of the view here. So that we should probably look at this more from a bigger picture as well.
Okay, so due to the time limitation, we have to come to the last part of the debate. So that's the conclusion part. So each team will take 5 minutes. It will start from Crystal AI because you start last just now. So we'll have Crystal AI to conclude first.
Okay. I guess it's a summary of all the points, but yeah. So in terms of the fact that we are debating this, the fact that at the Singapore FinTech Festival we have a topic which is addressing this, highlights the fact that there is a genuine concern that it is widening the gap. And it's an acknowledgement of the fact that it's something which we need to be aware of, we need to be mindful of, because the unintended outcome of AI and technology, just because of the sheer disproportionate starting point, which is today wealth is distributed in a manner which has got a gap, and the gap is already there. If you're going to apply technology in a disproportionate manner, the gap is only, the logical thing is for the gap to widen. The way it will not widen is by putting in extra efforts and taking the steps, and which is what which is what Thomas mentioned. I think the risk of biases is also very real because there are human beings who are controlling. So you can have an algorithm-driven recommendation engine, but you can do something where you can push a product and intervention, and those kind of things can be done. Now, those are real risks. Of course, there are mitigants being put in place, but those are real risks. So I think there is a real risk of these things going completely out of hand, and there has to be a conscious effort to prevent that. In terms of the dislocation, displacement, there are people who are losing their jobs to technology. There are some pockets in the world who are able to address it, but there are large parts in this world who are not able to address this displacement that is happening, and it is a challenge. You have somebody who starts a career in finance and is assuming a certain wealth growth, and that entire growth may never happen because the job is not relevant. You don't have that job in a let's say in a financial institution anymore, and that is happening. This is not a hypothetical situation. So there is clear evidence of jobs being lost, but there is no clear evidence that everyone is consistently able to seamlessly transition into new skills and acquiring those skills. So there is clearly a challenge that we have at this point of time, and we do strongly believe that it is helping increase the wealth gap, while it may be an unintended outcome, and hence this debate is a great forum to talk about this. Sorry, anything?
No, I think we're well summed up. That's exactly the points that we should think about here. And that's our position is yes, it does increase the wealth gap.
All right. Thank you very much. And it's actually going back to today's SFF theme. It's a talent summit talking about jobs and things like that. Yeah, but we will continue our debate. The last part really coming to value 3 to give you 5 minutes to actually summarize because you strongly believe that AI will not enlarge the wealth gap in our society. AI will do something good. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks. I agree with many of the points that the wealth gap, for instance, definitely at the moment is increasing, but there's no evidence that AI has caused that or contributed in a significant way. So it's, I think, unwise to pontificate that it will in the future do that. And part of this is, as Abhinav mentioned, we're bringing in a whole lot of other technologies that are driven by AI. Driverless cars reduce the road toll, which is quite significant, especially in first world countries. Aircraft will be flown by AI as well. So safety will increase as a result of AI directly. So I think you have to weigh not just financial wealth into this equation. You need to factor in other things like, I mentioned, healthcare. And even if you look at some of the, and I agree, there are some drawbacks to any technology change that will cause job loss. The textiles is a perfect one. So the Industrial Revolution, just to elaborate for the audience, there was 5 year, effectively a civil war in the UK where people died as a result of the replacement of the textile industry with machines. So there is significant consequences to revolutions. So we shouldn't make light of those. But at the same time, that was short term. In the whole scheme of things, in human evolution, 5 years wasn't long to learn the lesson. And I think now governments are aware of this. Back then they weren't, but now we've been through a few. To get back to the point about last century. So yes, the curve is that we started off about the same wealth gap. It dropped down and then it's gone back up again. But obviously what happened in the middle of last century? There was a world war when most of Europe were trying to kill each other. And so I don't think you can blame technology for that particular evening up of things. Obviously there was a lot of other things going on last century. But I think now that's another perfect example of where AI will come in to reduce the risk of starting unnecessary wars and accidental wars and technology in general. So yes, I rest my case that there's a risk of any technology that can increase the wealth gap, but I don't see any evidence that AI has done that yet, or it will in the near future.
We're not debating the broad AI. We are debating AI financial services.
Conclusion for you. So you can't tell?
Yeah, but I think that's what I was saying, that the broader aspects of AI affect wealth.
Yeah.
In that money's no good to you if you're dead. And so I think you can't split them in half, and that you have to accept all of AI or not accept all of it. Thanks.
You still have 2 minutes to. You still have 2 minutes. I think.
Abhinav, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thanks. I would just like to make a closing comment as well. I think first of all, as our counterparts from Crystal AI said, the fact that this topic is here at the FinTech Festival, means that we all take it seriously. So the challenge of wealth gap is real, and we all should acknowledge that. But at the same time, I believe once again that AI, if anything, is actually leading to financial inclusion, healthcare inclusion, and more inclusion to the underserved in the areas of logistics, in the area of transportation. So a lot of services are becoming more easier and accessible with the application of AI. And this would, as a result, would have an impact with in terms of creating wealth and creating, a better lifestyle for individuals. Now, the next that needs to come along is actually obviously education. Financial education, reskilling is very important, because for each job that is replaced by AI, a lot of new jobs are being created. However, often these jobs are also requiring higher skill. So skill development and reskilling is going to be at the forefront if we have to close this wealth gap. Because otherwise, whether it is with AI or without AI, that wealth gap is going to be there. So we need to do more than just automation and creating new jobs to actually reduce that wealth gap. So AI is doing its part in creating inclusion in society, both wealth, healthcare, and other services. And now we need the governments and other private and public institutions to come along to really work with the underserved to reduce this wealth gap that has been there with us for centuries. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for joining us today, Crystal AI and Value 3, and for all the audience watching our online debates online. So you could, join and keep voting for your favorite teams. For those who are watching playbacks, you could also do this. So we'll still open up the polls to vote for the winning team. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.